In the many ways that Japan stands out, there is one particular statistic that completely sets it apart from any other country in the world. Despite being one of the most populous nations, it is the only country in the world that has a homeless population rate of almost 0%. While the United States is experiencing a major homelessness crisis, with the number of people living on the street rising every year, Japan seems to have found the solution to a societal issue that was thought to not really have one. However, if you look past the headlines, the situation starts to look very different. The reality behind this seemingly amazing success reveals a disturbing and dark reality about life in Japanese society and what is really going on under the surface. So, how did Japan manage to have a 0% homelessness rate? And why is it actually not good news for the country? This is the dark secret of how Japan solved homelessness. According to official statistics, Japan, a country with over 125 million residents, has around 3,000 homeless people, about 0.003% of its population. This is significantly lower than other countries with low homelessness rates like Switzerland and miles ahead of countries like the US. But why exactly? Well, there are several reasons that are often mentioned as the cause of this extremely low rate. First, being homeless is actually very difficult in Japan, and in Japanese culture, it is incredibly stigmatized. According to a founder of a non-profit organization supporting the homeless in Japan, there is no culture of compassion for homeless people in the country. They are usually seen as individuals who only have themselves to blame for their situation and who deserve no help at all. This stigma is even stronger because the majority of homeless individuals in Japan are men who are traditionally expected to be self-reliant. Their failure to do so is seen as an embarrassing assessment both by the public and by themselves. As a result, authorities tend to make it harder to be homeless than in most countries. Any kind of begging in public is banned by law, and homeless people are pushed out of sight. Cities like Tokyo are known for implementing what's been called anti-homeless or hostile architecture, such as locked parks at night or uncomfortable benches, designed to discourage homeless people from staying in the area. Some of Japan's unique policies, while not designed to reduce homelessness, help to do so anyway. Japan has very strict laws on drugs other than alcohol and severe punishment, resulting in only 1.6% of the Japanese population trying drugs other than alcohol in their lifetime, compared to 46% of Americans. This means that drug addiction in Japan is barely an issue. Additionally, Japan has a robust healthcare system, significant because 30 to 35% of people who experience homelessness in the United States have a mental illness. In Japan, people with severe mental illnesses tend to be placed in mental health institutions, whereas in the United States, they often end up on the streets. Finally, Japan has relatively accessible housing because it builds more houses than any other developed democratic country. Unlike most Western countries, where building housing became increasingly difficult due to various regulations, Japan took the opposite route with very few restrictions, making it easy to build and relatively affordable. So, on the surface, Japan can be seen as an example of a country that has solved a major social issue. However, that's not entirely true. Despite the official numbers, the reality is much more grim, and there are many more people without a home in Japan, hidden away from sight and government statistics. In the 1990s, Japan experienced a severe economic crisis when the stock and real estate markets collapsed. In the following years, it became extremely difficult to secure a steady, regular job with decent pay. As a result, millions of people were left to survive on low-paying, temporary part-time jobs, becoming known as Japan's lost generation. Many of them never managed to recover, and they became excluded from society with no status, no place in society, and no future. Consequently, many of them were unable to hold down an apartment and pay rent every month, even in a relatively affordable Japan. However, they would do anything to avoid living on the streets, to avoid the shame and stigma from society. The phenomenon of cyber homelessness emerged, individuals using 24-hour internet and manga cafes as temporary shelters. These net cafe refugees pay by the hour and can stay as long as they want, sleeping in computer cubicles. Over time, these cafes expanded their services to offer food, drinks, fresh underwear, or showers. While this phenomenon helps people avoid falling to the very bottom of society and allows them to maintain some level of dignity, it also demonstrates the incredible problems that Japanese society has as a whole. The government statistics of homeless people in Japan are considered wildly underestimated. Non-government organizations estimate that the real numbers of people living on the streets in Japan are at least 3 times higher than the government reports. In 2020, it was estimated that at least 15,000 people lived in cyber cafes in Tokyo alone, 5 times as many as the official number of homeless people in the entire Japan. While this phenomenon of cyber homelessness can be seen as positive for helping people avoid the very bottom of society and maintaining dignity, it also highlights the problems within Japanese society. A third of the entire Japanese workforce, over 22 million people, are part-time or temp workers not by choice, but because they can't get a regular full-time job. While not all of them are homeless, most are only paid a minimum wage, struggling to afford normal rent, with no prospects of their economic situation getting much better. Even though Japan's official homelessness rate is much lower than in the US, the percentage of people living in poverty is actually higher in Japan than in the States. While only a few end up on the street, many more end up on the fringe of society, stuck living in cyber cafes and capsule hotels in a never-ending cycle of not being able to get a proper job to get an apartment, and not being able to get an apartment to get a proper job because of societal pressure. They prefer to remain invisible, and society prefers it as well. A problem that stays out of sight is a problem that can be easily ignored, and the government can continue to claim a 0% homelessness rate. But underneath, it is a symbol of all the things that went wrong with the Japanese economy, and a problem that's here to stay as the number of invisible homeless is only about to grow.